Itmar, and I will be your host today. On behalf of the IDI, we welcome you to our event. Furthermore, we are delighted to share this exciting moment and provide a special welcome to our main speaker, Ms. Rachel Song. Rachel is a research fellow at the National Institute for South China Sea Studies. We are very excited and overwhelmed to see the tremendous hype around diplomacy among students around the world. And I would like to start by providing a short overview of the organization. So the International Diplomacy Initiative is a student-run nonprofit dedicated to advancing diplomacy around the world through engaging practices with students through lectures and other events. Founded in Israel, the IDI is looking to open chapters around the world, with a new chapter already founded in Germany and with representatives around the world. Please visit our website to learn more about our organization, become a member, or learn more about how to get involved in our team and start a chapter in your country or city. Today with us are presented Mr. Tal Zellinger and both board and staff members. I would like to welcome our speaker, Rachel Song. Rachel, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, staff. And hi, everyone. It's very nice to meet you here. And I'm Renxi Song. And so today, first, I will open my. So, okay. First, currently, I'm sorry a bit. Yes, here we are. Yes, sorry. So currently I'm an assistant research fellow in the National Institute for South China Sea Studies. So I'm very happy today to have you here, and especially thanks to Trenton and the International Diplomacy Initiative inviting me to this amazing event. And the topic I'm sharing today is analyzing the South China Sea disputes. And this is basically from China's perspective. So before we started, I will give some very small hints about why I take this job and doing something related with it. So I first got interest in the particular topic was when I studied conflict resolution in the University of Essex in UK. And I did that for a case study already at that time. So I have some basic background before I take this job. After my graduation, and then I seek a position, and in this present institute I work with, we are offered me brilliant chance to study the case in depth from a diplomatic, strategic, and academic way. And during the last 2 years, I had chance to communicate with the representatives and scholars from claimant states in the diplomatic, international law, and in strategic field. So firstly, let's start it with a small case recently happened in South China Sea. You can see this reef. This is, we call it in Chinese 牛二礁, but in English we call it Whitsun Reef. Recently, at one point in March, 220 Chinese ships were reported anchored around this reef. And we can see here is which taken the photo in March 23, and here is 28. So it was first reported by Philippines media and then become a diplomatic engagement. On March 21st, the Philippine Defense Secretary, Danfield Lorenzana, called the presence of Chinese fishing ships a clear provocation and accused their military militias. And Chinese fishing ships, and the military militias, let's give a small definition on that. It's a very heated topic recently in Western world because they think China will send military forces, but actually the military militias, they are fishermen, and they only they only take like defense themselves in some certain areas. For example, if they meet dangerous situations like pirates, they actually will arm themselves with a force. And in peacetime, generally they are fishermen, and only in wars they are the men in armed. So this is the militias. And on March 22nd, the Chinese embassy in the Philippines issued a statement on the presence of alleged Chinese maritime militia vessels in Niuejiao, claiming Niuejiao is a part of China's Nansha Qundao. And it has been many years that Chinese fishing vessels are fishing there. Recently, many fishing vessels there is due to rough sea conditions, and they are taking shelters. There is no Chinese maritime militia is alleged, and hope no further speculation, and the situation could be handled in an object in a rational manner. So here we can see this is where the New Ejiao is, and here is Vietnam, and this is Hainan where I'm based now, and up is China, and here is Philippines in the east. And then we can see like the situation actually is not going better, because on March 25th, Vietnam's foreign ministry accused China's violating its country's sovereignty and demanded the ships leave. So you see, in this particular reef, not only China is in the dispute, it's also like Philippines and Vietnam has territory claims on it. And on March 29th, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken expressed support for Philippines over the presence of Chinese vessels. And on March 31st, US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan spoke with his Philippines counterpart, Esperon, and discussing the recent massing of People's Armed Force maritime militia vessels at the Whitsun Reef. And later in the next 2 days regular press conference on the Foreign Ministry of Chinese spokesperson reaffirmed its sovereignty on Niu Ejiao, saying it is an attempt to drive wedge between China and the Philippines by some forces, and China and the Philippines have maintained close communication. But the story doesn't end yet. With the sea condition being better in the last week, most of the Chinese vessels left for their fishing, and remaining like 44 ships there. And a new round of dispute started again. On April 4th, the Philippine Defense Secretary Delphine Lorenzana issued a statement calling on Chinese maritime militias to leave the waters in the area and the vicinity of Niuejiao. And the Department of Foreign Affairs lodged a diplomatic protest rejecting China's assertion that the reef and its water are traditional Chinese fishing grounds, and adding that the 2016 award in the South China Sea arbitration is clearly the only norm applicable in this situation. So later I will talk about the award about 2016. It was a key component in the whole South China Sea issue, but just has some impression on it. Later I will talk about that. And on April 5th and 6th, the Chinese embassy in the Philippines and the Chinese spokesperson respectively respond to this issue above and reiterating that China's sovereignty over Niuejiao and saying the water in vicinity is the traditional Chinese ground for Chinese fishermen for many years. And again, the Chinese spokesperson repeated the position that the tribunal's award in the South China Sea arbitration is illegal now and void. So China neither accepts nor recognizes the award, and China firmly opposed any claims or actions based on the award. And up to now, the things are still going at the moment. And over these days, according to the news report, Chinese fishing vessels are being there sheltering. And according to the Armed Force of the Philippines' recent monitoring, no new constructions to the except the past 3 recorded constructions by the Vietnamese and the 2 by the Chinese there. So which shows that China is indeed not doing something horrible there. And a very interesting point is recently the problems get to relieve a little bit, because the Philippines President Duterte stands by his Defense Secretary Ronzana's side by the same time, and he's trying not to relieve the he's trying to relieve the intention over the event a bit, and saying that the Philippines and China will continue to resolve the issue through diplomatic channel and through peaceful means. Here above is a brief introduction on the recent Yuejiao event, and this is only a very small event in the whole South China Sea areas, but it has already involved 4 actors, namely China, Philippines, Vietnam, and US. And the relevant issues including like fishing activities, sovereignty and jurisdiction dispute, and ocean governance in the whole region. So through the key case, I hope you can have a general idea on how tangled that the dispute can be. So this is a brief outline for today's lecture. I'll first talk about the essence for the South China Sea dispute. Then I go with the China's position. And the third part will be some regional arrangement on South China Sea crisis management. The fourth will be the role of the extra regional player, which is one of the key elements in the whole story. And the last things will be the future of the disputes as a conclude of today's lecture. And after that, we can have like Q&A regarding the questions. Okay, so I'm starting my lecture with the essence of the South China Sea dispute. As we might note, the South China Sea is situated to the south of China's mainland and is connected by narrow straits or waterways with the Pacific Oceans to the east to the Indian Oceans and to the west. It's a semi-closed sea extending from the northeast to the southwest, covering an area about 3.5 million square kilometers. Here we can see the South China Sea, and there is another part in the Thailand. Actually, they combine together 3.5 million square kilometers. And just here is not the total range of the South China Sea. And it has 4 island groups as it shows in the map. These 4 island groups. And more than 230 features of Nansha Islands here. The essence of South China Sea actually has 2 related aspects. The first relates to the sovereignty, namely the sovereignty on the features unresolved. And the second relates to the delimitation of exclusive economic zone. Later we call it ZEZ, and the continental shelf in the South China Sea due to the development of modern law of the sea. The second point is more related with the jurisdiction rights developed from the birth of the UNCLOS and the law of the sea. That I will explain. So this is the essence of the South China Sea disputes. Basically just 2 points. One is the sovereignty and the second is jurisdiction. Okay, and so far we can see like in the Spratly Islands, which is the one of the islands group here. This here is the biggest one in the south. In Spratly Islands, we can see 8 islands and reefs are currently controlled by Philippines and 5 by Malaysia. Vietnam, which is the most active actors in the South China Sea, has occupied 29 of the islands and the reefs. And mainland China has 7 outposts in Spratly after the Battle of Spratly Islands on 14 March 1988. Taiwan region, as a part of China, has consistently exercised effective jurisdiction over Taipingdao, which is the we also call it Itu Aba, which is the largest island in the Spratly Islands. And Taiwan also have the Dongsha Islands here after the Second World War. So here is the paracel. China has control fully of the paracel. We also call it Xisha in Chinese, after the Battle of the Paracel Islands on January 19, 1974. Okay. Then I will go to the China's position. China's position is elaborated like China's position on territorial sovereignty and the maritime rights and interests in the South China Sea was elaborated in the 2016 July 12th statement. And there are mainly 4 points. The first is China's Nanhai Zhu Dao. We call it the South China Sea Islands, consists of the 4 groups of islands we earlier talked about, which is the Dongsha, Xisha, Zhongsha, and Nansha. And the Xisha, we call it Paracel, and here is Spratly, is Nansha. And PRC has firm in upholding China's territorial sovereignty and maritime rights and interests in the South China Sea. The third one is China has territorial sovereignty and maritime rights and interests in the South China Sea. Fourth is China is always firmly opposed to the invasion of some islands and reefs of China's Nansha Qundao. And which means like any islands, reefs, or any features in these areas, the invasion is unacceptable, and activities infringing upon China's rights in relevant maritime areas under China's jurisdiction. And the last one is a very concerning one, and it's also dealing with more with US in that part, especially for the freedom of navigation. And China respects and upholds the freedom of navigation and overflights enjoyed by all states under international law in the South China Sea. Actually, China also made a statement on supporting the freedom of navigation. So let's go further into the third point, like elaborate like how China's territory, sovereignty, and maritime rights and interests in the South China Sea. So it's basically based on the practice of Chinese people and Chinese government in a long course of history and a position consistently upheld by successive Chinese governments, and in accordance with national law and international law, including the UNCLOS. This is the law later we will talk about. And China has territorial sovereignty and maritime rights interest in the South China Sea, including here we see the 4 groups of islands. We repeat that before. And China has internal water, territorial sea, and contingent zone based on Nanhai Zhudao. And the third point is China has exclusive economic zone and continental shelf based on Nanhai Zhudao. The last point is China has historic rights in South China Sea. So one thing that it's going to mention is about, so far China only has the baseline for the Hainan Islands. Like I will put this there. Sorry. So now we can see like China has the baseline for the territory sea is look like that. And here is the baseline for the Hainan Islands. And also they have strict baseline for the Paracel. In here, Paracel Islands is located in the west of that part. Okay. And China only have the baseline for this one, and so far have not yet set for the Spratly Islands and the Zhongsha and Dongsha also do not really set the baseline. Okay, so if you hear like till now, maybe if you were the first time seeing the statement, you may think China is too ambitious, and it's maybe you would think it's deserved like all the blames around, and exactly that's what's happening at the moment now, especially in the media, in the Western media, I would say that. So now I'm going to illustrate further China's positions, which is going to help you to understand why China take this stance. As for the basis of China's claim, there are abundant historical resources, including the official documents, local chronicles, and official maps, and so on to support it. Here I skip the ancient part and start from the everything after the Second World War. In the early 20th century, China's Nansha Islands are invaded by France and Japan. After Japan's surrender in 1945, China recovered its sovereignty over Nansha Islands. Nansha Islands, the 4 groups of islands, pursuant a series of international documents from the World War II, including the Carroll Declaration and the Potsdam Proclamation. In 1946, the Chinese government completed an on-the-spot recovery of the Nansha Islands and proclaimed to the world it had resumed exercise of sovereignty over Nansha Islands. And after China recovered the Nansha Islands, the Ministry of the Interior of the Chinese government drew the map of islands in the South China Sea. And this is the map, actually. It's called the Nanhai 诸岛位置图. It's marking on its like 11 section dotted line starting from the Beilunhe estuary at the China-Vietnam border in the west here, and to the area northeast of the Taiwan Island in the east, which you can see here, and it's 11 dot line. The names of the 4 islands, we can see here, the 4 islands in the South China Sea, as well as the names of a large number of individual reefs, islands, banks, sand within the dotted line were marked on the, here actually the little characters, all the names actually are marked on the map. The map of islands in the South China Sea was officially published in February 1948 by the Ministry of Interior as an annex of the map of the administrative region of the Republic of China. And so the dotted line of the South China Sea was thus made public and has been used ever since. And these are all the marker stones established at that time when the ROC government reclaimed them. And we see like this Zhongye Island, which Thito Islands now actually is under Philippines control, and the Nanwei Island, Spratly Island, now is under Vietnam's control. Now we move the time a little bit forward, which is after the 1949. After the founding of the People's Republic of China in 1949, it first has the statement about the South China Sea issue. It has the statement on like the 1958 Declaration of Government of People's Republic of China on Territory Sea. And it has further confirmed Chinese territorial sovereignty and maritime rights and histories. In the 1959, the Office of Xisha, Nansha, and Zhongsha Islands Affair under the government of Guangdong Province was established by Chinese government on the Yongxin Islands. So first, Yongxin Island actually is in Paracel. But at that time, this office was ministered by Guangdong Province, which is this province. And now actually it's administered by Hainan Islands, which is after Hainan become a province later, and I will talk about that. So, however, during the 60s, 70s, the Philippines, Vietnam, and Malaysia began referring to the Spratly Islands as included in their own territory for 4 reasons. Here I give the 4 reasons very quickly. Basically, the increasingly geostrategic importance of the South China Sea and the development of marine resources accelerated, leading to a prospect on oils and gas resources in the region. And geopolitical environment of the Cold War, because at that time in the 1670s, the China's relations with Soviet Union have some problems, I think, at that time, and it's very and also U.S. give its commitment to China he's not going to get involved into the affair. So here is a reason why I say the Cold War. And the last is the negotiation of the UNCLOS. It allows coastal states to set limits of territory seas and the contingent zone and assess exclusive economic zones, continental shelf jurisdiction. So here is a brief map in case that some of you might not know about that. So after the UNCLOS, it's basically out of the, it's allowed the coastal states to set these areas and take them under its jurisdiction rights. generally speaking, out of 12 nautical miles from the baseline is territory waters. Here we can see it's the territory waters. And beyond the 12 nautical miles limit, there is a further 12 nautical miles from the territory baseline limits is the contingent zone. And the area extends 200 nautical miles from the baseline. And the continental shelf, which is also an important concept I will talk about because it have diplomatic engagement again later. The continental shelf is defined as the natural prolongation of the land territory to the continental margin outer edge. So, or 200 nautical miles from the coastal state's baseline, whichever is greater. A state's continental shelf may exceed 200 nautical miles until the natural prolongation ends. Here is the brief introduction of the UNCLOS rule. In the South China Sea, there are all these components actually are related with UNCLOS, so let's have a quick look on that, and then I move forward. And then after the 1960s to 70s, from 1980s to today, China is continually upholding its territorial sovereignty and the maritime rights and interests in South China Sea. Firstly, the office of, I just mentioned, like the Xisha, Nansha, and the Zhongshan Islands affair, become a part of the government of the newly established Hainan province in 1988. Besides, we see more legal instruments such as the 1992 Law of the People's PRC on Territory Sea and the Contingent Zone, and 1998 Law of People's Republic of China on Exclusive Economic Zone and the Continental Shelf, and the 1996 decision of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress of the People's Republic of China on the ratification of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea were adopted to further reaffirm China's territorial sovereignty and maritime rights and the interest in the South China Sea. And in June 2012, the Chinese government granted approval to establish the prefecture-level city of Sansha to administer the Xisha, which is Paracel. So in Paracel, it actually has a prefecture-level city already at that in 2012. And most recently, that there are other documents, but most recently, the Coast Guard law, the Chinese Coast Guard law was adopted at the 25th session of Standing Committee of the 30th National People's Congress and was formally enforced in February the 1st. The law obviously raised another wave of accusation and suspicion towards China, like if China would use power and ask for the specify the certain articles in this law, and we can talk about it later in the Q&A. We can see reclamation. We can see lots of things actually clashes happen. And one thing I think in few years ago that very heated topic is about reclamation. And we can see Vietnam, this is will Vietnam reclaim for the islands, for the features, I would say the features. And this is a very, not very, but this is an example that the Malaysia doing for the swollen reef. It just make it a tourist place for tourist attraction. So it's how actually all the disputes, relevant parties, they are actually doing something like that. So that's just an example for that over the past 50 years, what countries did on the islands. At the same time, we see clashes. The clashes were actually witnessed. We can see some Western scholars like persuade Vietnam should sue China, like what Philippines did. And in 2019, Vietnam's attempt to drill unilaterally in the South China Sea, and one of the problem is like this area, at least in the last century, like in 1990s, earlier 1990s, actually, China actually signed a contract with a U.S. company to drill this area, but Vietnam actually protested, and they have like military actions. And later, and in the 2019, the same story occurred again, but obviously the actors will change. And this picture is one very is a one that's very eye scratching, like last year, and also before, like since 2018, I think Indonesia Navy started to blow up the illegal fishing boats. And it's also involved the fishing boats from Vietnam, from Philippines, and in China, from China. And this event here below, like the second event, is a Vietnamese fishing boat ram into a Chinese Coast Guard vessel in Paracel. It was happened in April last year, and it caused a lot of accusation and blame on Chinese Coast Guard at that time. And it's also show like why the dispute states actually will have some kind of like feeling over China. But also at the similar, like last year, also in April, a Vietnamese fisherman death in an illegal fishing dispute with MMEA, which is Malaysia Maritime Enforcement Agency. So illegal, so we can see in this area, combating illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, which is IUU, is one of the relevant issues in this area. And also the drilling, Malaysia has its drilling rig in the area, which is like also unilateral drilling activities. These are all the all the events, like just some of them. There are lots of others actually trigger the diplomatic tension, and they usually keep sometimes influence actually between the countries' relations, especially. So there is another typical diplomatic engagement in the international community when Malaysia submitted outer limits of the continental shelf beyond 200 nautical miles from the baseline to the Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf on 12 December 2019. China first issued a note verbal complaining Malaysia's submission infringed its sovereignty and jurisdiction rights in the South China Sea. Then we see the claimants one by one submitting note verbal complain both on Malaysian and Chinese claims. And later the participants like US and Australia, and later they're still like France, Germany, and UK also submit their note verbal, mainly reject Chinese position. So this is like this engagement. Up to now, this is a simple review of the South China Sea dispute. And I think you already heard several times about arbitration. So then I will give a brief introduction on it. Basically, on January 2013, the Aquino the third administration of the Philippines unilaterally submitted the dispute between China and the Philippines in the South China Sea to international arbitration and officially presented the memorial to the arbitral tribunal on 30 March 2014. And here is a brief note of the whole process. And we see like in the February 19th, China rejected the note verbal, and in March 13, Philippines submitted the first time the memorial presented, and later actually later in 2015, Philippines revised its memorial and make it 15 submissions, which change. And this is from China's perspective, that actually ruled its harm for the procedure of the arbitration. And so in the 2014, December 7th, China submits its position paper. Here we have a very brief introduction on what Philippines want, and here is China's position paper. And later, let's go with that. And the whole situation later will be like in the July 7th, the tribunal starting the hearing of the jurisdiction and admissibility. And in October 29th, the word on jurisdiction and admissibility. And in November 24th, the hearing on the merits and the remaining issues. In the whole process, we see Taiwan region is playing something at that time, because China has its position just not get involved into the arbitration at the very beginning, which is go back to at first time it's reject note verbal. And in 2016, June 8th, and the China made the statements of arbitration by the foreign ministry, and it's we know like the award was granted at the several days after, but China sticks with the negative attitudes towards that since then. Okay, so in this arbitration, Philippines want to claim that China's 9-dash line and historical rights without lawful effect, and it tried to ask the tribunal to give the legal status of 9 insular features, and also claim China's law enforcement activities unlawful. And the fourth part is the rights and obligation given by the UNCLOS. Obviously, for the implication of the word, the tribunal ruled in favor of the Philippines on most of the submissions, and a word has a profound impact on the issue of sovereignty, and the word has major implications for maritime rights and entitlements. First, like for the impact the issues on the sovereignty, because we earlier mentioned like China claimed its sovereignty over the 4 groups of islands, but Philippines tried to take those islands and those features apart and directly go to tribunal with different features. So which it's not from China's perspective, the tribunal has no rights to have has no jurisdiction on the sovereignty problems, and those sovereignty because China take the whole island groups as a entity. So here we goes with the China's at that time what China say about the position. First, China and the Philippines agreed to settle the dispute through bilateral negotiation, because after the July 12th, at one point it's very likely to have some kind of crisis at that time, because no country know what China will react. But China indeed later sent the position paper, sent a statement actually telling that they are going to settle the dispute through bilateral negotiations. And the 2 states have never conducted any negotiation on the subject matters of the arbitration. This is what China claims also why China did not join into the arbitration. It's because China think that China did not have negotiation on this subject matters with Philippines before the arbitration. And the essence of the subject matter of the arbitration is territorial sovereignty dispute. I already gave that explanation, because China take have the sovereignty over over the iron groups, and Philippines actually take a part of the each features, which is in accordance with China's China's claim. And the subject matter is also an integral part of the maritime delimitation excluded by China's 2006 declaration. So UNCLOS actually give the right for China to exclude the compulsory resolvement procedure. So that was already be put out by China in 2006. So as for China, how to think with like dealing with that, obviously, China prefers negotiation and consultation directly with the other party. This orientation mostly originates from Chinese culture and history. For example, by the year of 2000, after 26 years of negotiation, China has settled with Vietnam on the basis of international law and an equitable manner. The delimitation of the territory sea, EEZ, and the continental shelf of Beibu Bay, which is also the Tofing, I will show you the map. Here. Here is the Beibu Bay, the Tonkin Gulf. So basically, Vietnam and China makes achieve, and so China and Vietnam, in an equitable manner, the delimitation of the territory sea, EEZ, and the continental shelf of Beibu Bay has achieved, and they made appropriate arrangements for bilateral fishery cooperation in the Beibu Bay. In addition, China and Vietnam reached consensus on the principle of properly addressing their maritime issues. In recent years, China and Vietnam have successively established mechanisms for settling maritime disputes and promoting maritime cooperation. Besides, China's perception of the role of international court in disputes settlement is passive, as I just talked about in the arbitration case, and it has opted out of compulsory arbitration for addressing sovereignty issues in 2006. Moreover, China's position with regard to its South China Sea claims, its readiness to enter into provisional arrangements of a practical nature, including joint or cooperative development in relevant maritime areas in order to achieve win-win results. So here is the example with Philippines. Despite the down in dumps of Philippine-China relations after the 2013 arbitration, in November 2018, the Memorandum of Understanding on Cooperation on Oil and Gas Development, this MOU between the two governments, Philippines and China, was signed. In August 2019, the two countries announced that they would set up an intergovernmental joint steering committee and a working group between relevant enterprises from the two countries on the oil and the gas cooperation. China also reached consensus with countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, and Brunei to work together to maintain peace and stability in the South China Sea. In September 2019, China and Malaysia agreed to establish a bilateral consultation mechanism on maritime issues. And the last point is about the endorse of consultation on COC with the ASEAN countries. It's more a part of the regional arrangement on the South China Sea crisis management. So on this crisis management, one example, here I give three examples. The first example is the Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea, which we also call it DOC, signed by China and the 10 ASEAN member states in 2002. The DOC is a political document signed by China and ASEAN member states to maintain peace and stability in the South China Sea. to enhance mutual trust and to promote cooperation. And the Article 10 of DOC set up a goal of formulating a code of conduct. We can see here the COC in the South China Sea. Therefore, the consultation on the COC is an integral part of the process of fully and effectively implementing the DOC. And also at the same time, the COC is expected to be an upgraded version of DOC, which would more effectively regulate relevant parties, enhance confidence, manage difference, further cooperations, further promote cooperations among China and the Asian countries. In 2013, the 6th senior official meetings on DOC was held in Suzhou, China, at which the COC consultation process was launched. Since then, the parties have also reached consensus on issues like establish the hotline communication among senior officials of the Ministries of Foreign Affairs of China and Asian member states in response to maritime emergencies and application of Code of Unplanned Encounters at Sea and Code of Unplanned Encounters at Sea is CUES. China and the US also reached the CUES in 2014, I think. Yes, and so this is basically the crisis management when if there's any emergencies happen in the South China Sea. So far, let's go back to the code of conduct in the negotiation. And now it's one of the most important things in the regional level. We see like in May 2017, the 14th senior official meeting on DOC was held in Guiyang, China, at which the draft COC framework was adopted at that time, like in 2017. And in August 2018, China and Asian countries arrived at a single draft negotiating text of the COC. The single draft negotiating test basically is put all those I would say all those articles that the parties want in one test. So that's called the single draft negotiating test. So it's big, it has a lot of contents, and it was finished in the 2019. And in October 2019, the second reading of the COC task force started. But because of the pandemic, only 3 online meetings are held since then. So basically now the COC negotiation is not smooth as what we expect before. So these developments of South China Sea disputes also raise an important questions about the role that extra-regional actors plays in the disputes. Here we take U.S. as an example, since the U.S. has its power deployed in this area since the end of the Second World War. A prominent example here showing the U.S. policy on South China Sea dispute is Secretary of State in President Trump's administration, Mike Pompeo's statement. And there is brief on Pompeo's statement and China's spokesperson's response. And we see like China has no, Pompeo say that China has no coherent legal basis for its 9-line claim and insisting that arbitral tribunal award is effective to China and accusing Beijing is treat the South China Sea as its maritime empire, and they reaffirm its commitment to those allies and the partners in this region. And the next day, actually, the South China, the China spokesperson give a response on Pompeo's statement. And it said, like, again, like China's sovereignty rights and interests have been established over the history, and China will never accept the award. And on the accusation of building a maritime empire, our spokesperson said China never seeks to build a maritime empire and send signals, and accusing that US so far did not ratify the UNCLOS yet. what we can see so far is US policy is strongly motivated by its interests. And according to the report of Congressional Research Service, we can have a hint on it. And here are the US think of its interest in the South China Sea and the East China Sea. And firstly, the first is its reaffirming commitments to its regional allies and partners, which comprise its regional security architecture. And here in the left, in the right below, we have a picture of US allies and traditional partners, emerging partners in this area. And the second is accusation China relies on nouns of force or coercion. The third is about the principle of freedom of navigations. Obviously, China has a different understanding on it, since China think because when you go with the freedom of navigation, this problem it's always go with the concept of the freedom of the seas and the jurisdiction rights of the coastal states. So for China, we respect the freedom of the seas, but it's also need to consider the rights of the coastal states, the jurisdiction rights specifically in this area. And so when US actually what stick with the freedom of sea will be go more general, and it will go covering more things. For example, it's covering the freedom of the freedom navigations of the military vessels, which is rejected by Chinese side. Like the military vessels navigating in the territory sea, there is an area like in the territory sea, like US supports that, but China actually reject that. And the fourth interest concerning in the South China Sea for US is South China Sea is an important trade route and hydrocarbons for its allies. For example, it's important for Japan and Korea, but also at the same time, it's also important for China. China is an important it's an important energy passage for China, especially for oil imports from the Middle East. And the fifth is about China's US interpretation on China's behavior in the South China Sea and whether China will become more threatening and what's gonna China's responsibility as a major world power, which is uncertain for US at the moment. And the last interest is the developments in the South China Sea could affect US-China relations in general, which could have implications for other issues in the in the US-China relations. So basically now US and China are in the bargaining table already. It's the South China Sea might be problems that will be involved in that general bargaining. So far, US maintains its neutrality on the rival sovereignty claims in the South China Sea. And deny or not, the US is an actual player in the South China Sea, and it's also, so here I give some US actual involvement in the South China Sea in 2012. We can see this picture actually shows the US military bases now in the global wild, and you can see like around China there are some of them also. In military, the US military successively deployed 3 carrier strike groups, 2 amphibious ready groups, several nuclear attack submarines, and 17 batches of B-52H Stratofortress and the B-1B Lancer bombers to the South China Sea for dynamic force employment. The intensity in terms of the scale, numbers, and duration of the US military activities in this region in 2020 was rarely seen in recent years. Actually, even though it's in even though it's in a pandemic era, but still like this kind of signals is still very strong in South China Sea. Besides, according to the incomplete statistic, throughout the year, the US military conducted nearly 1,000 times recon reconnaissance sorties from several bases, such as the Osan Air Base in South Korea, Kadena Air Force Base in Okinawa, and Anderson Air Force Base in Guam, and Clark Air Base in Philippines and Brunei. Moreover, the U.S. military continued to operate intensively near China's Station Islands and reefs in the South China Sea. And in the name of freedom of navigation and overflight, um, besides we talk about, it's a little bit different with the Chinese scholars recently are thinking about the difference between the freedom of navigation and overflight will be like freedom of navigation programs, like the difference. And specifically, the US military operated near China's Station Islands and the reefs in the South China Sea 9 times, 5 times near the Paracel Islands and 4 near the Spratly Islands. But one thing is like the US conducted military exercise and drills much less frequently in the South China Sea compared with the years before. It also can be seen as the influence of the COVID-19. In the diplomacy, we can see US is getting closer with Vietnam, and it's visiting foreign agreements with Philippines. Now is before the Philippines wants to stop it, but now we see the Philippines stop its suspension, suspend this whole progress, and there might be a chance that the VFA will come back again. So which allows U.S. deployment in Philippines. And also U.S. trying to join other extra regional countries like European allies, and also like Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Korea get more involved into the South China Sea issue. And the last one I put here is Pompeo's statements. It's not only about Pompeo, it's about like many US, I think it's a bipartisan also consensus already, like pulling pressures on that. And there are lots of voices can be heard from the higher ranked officials from the United States to give more pressures in the South China Sea towards China. And in the law scenario, like this is what US consistently doing, is imposing the word rejected by China repeatedly, and China of course rejected again and again. And also US supports Vietnam pursue China, and US want to encourage an abiding COC, like so far whether the code of conduct will be binding or not for the crisis management is still a question, but US already put its attitude quite clearly. And in the economic sense, US last year sanctioning 24 Chinese companies because they are participating into the reclamation of the artificial islands. I think this is the problems. And the US recent move actually makes the unilateral activities by claimants have intensified. And also the coastal states in the South China Sea are less willing to cooperate at sea. And this is the two direct influence also towards the disputant, the claimants in this area. So we can see like only in the last, in February, like 75 sorties of US reconnaissance aircraft operating over the South China Sea already. And there are 4 types of military operations that US usually take in this area. So here I give conclusions on the relevant issues. We can see a great amount of relevant issues are actually putting there, including sovereignty and the maritime jurisdiction rights, and and also it's include with the support rate of the domestic audience. It matters not only for, it matters basically for each claimant states in this area. And it's also the major commercial shipping routes, and it's a strategic importance derived from the island chain strategy. I think people who are doing the geostrategic have ever heard about this strategy. And fisheries is also the relevant issues and the potentially significant oil and gas exploitation areas. And also the one prominent another example is how to define freedom of navigation and rule-based order between China and the US, and also China with some other Western countries. And last is about the maritime governance, for example, like how the enforcement authorities to go to combat the IUU activities, like all these relevant issues are put in there. Because when I was doing conflict resolution, I was taught like analyze the different conflicts in an onion shape, and here we put like the position and interest and needs there, because here today, according to what I did, I put like the Chinese position and interest and needs, and maybe you can make comparison in your future study on how the South China Sea other claimants, their position, interest, and needs. That's gonna help a bit if you are doing the research on that part. And we can see like for China, what really matters is about the territory, is the sovereignty and the security. The first is through advancing in global variety, because that will make them the security where it comes from, and the stability in the domestic society. And as we talk about so much, as earlier mentioned, so far we see like in the South China Sea, within the region, there are lacks of trust with unresolved sovereignty dispute. And also now we see US get involved, and US and other actors actually get involved more inside. So we have no idea on where is the red line. So in these circumstances, the crisis management is much more important. And even though we are putting with the DOC and the COC negotiation, and that is a measure that every claimant state shall really treasure for that and make efforts on it. And the third point is like if we want to start with some cooperation in maritime affairs, maybe from some less sensitive areas like maritime governance on fisheries and combating marine plastic debris, etc. And the last point I will make is the territorial and maritime delimitation dispute must be solved by the claimant states, because and it's possible measure. One of it is the delimitation in the whole dispute area. Okay, so here is my presentation, my lecture for today's event, and I hope we can move to Q&A if there's any questions.
All right. Thank you, Rachel. We do have a couple of questions for you. So how does the Belt and Road Initiative impact countries' acceptance of China's maritime claims?
So it's like how the Belt and Road Initiative is going to impact the claimant states.
Countries' acceptance, yeah.
Yes. To be honest, it's quite different. Like, so the Belt and Road Initiative actually is different layer of questions compared with the South China Sea disputes. Like the disputes actually are there, and also at the same time the Belt and Road Initiative actually are also just also in there, and they are actually in the two line, and they are not literally have connections. At one point, is China wants to keep a good trade relations with the other countries at this point, and if the South China Sea dispute, at some point it will will do harm. Actually, will do harm to China's the Belt and Road Initiative in those areas. For example, nowadays China has a lot of industry park with Malaysia, with Philippines, and also actually it's China. When China actually deal with the South China Sea issue, it's also need to be very concerned with whether the nationalism within those countries is going to have impacts on the economic. So that would be one consideration. But generally, this is two questions in two different levels because, but they will have some kind of impact, but they are in two different questions because one is more with economic ties and the other is the very core essence of the territory dispute. Yeah. I hope I answered the question.
I don't know why it happens every time. Thank you. So we do have another one. How do you think the impact of the RCEP signed in 2020 is dealing with the SCS dispute?
I think the RCEP is an economic package, right? Yes, it's Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. I mean, basically, it's how it's gonna relate with the South China Sea dispute. I actually cannot see like it will have a much closer relations with the South China Sea disputes because we can see this RCEP maintain more countries inside. It's not only the dispute, the claimant states. It's also maintain the countries like Cambodia, Myanmar, New Zealand, Australia. So it's just not really literally will have that. And also for the regional comprehensive economic for the this partnership, it's especially it's about economic partnership. It's much more important to how to design the partnership, how to design the mechanism to make it work. Also in a lot of mechanism problems, not only focus. It's also like because it motivates with it's concerned with the countries that's not only within the South China Sea dispute areas. So this is the South China Sea province will not really be impacted in this particular partnership. So that's my answer.
Thank you. And we have another one. All right, generally speaking, have you observed any changes since the start of Biden administration? Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems this presidential antithesis, the position of the former U.S. administration, it's a long one, E.g. Pompeo, and America's first. Thank you for the for the presentation. Please feel free to read the question. Oh, sorry. It's from Jesse from the USA.
I'm repeating the question again.
Yeah, it was a long one.
How the Biden's administration.
Do you feel anything? Basically, he asks if you feel any changes since the administration changed.
Okay, see that. Actually, I think basically, especially like last month, they have like interim term of the national security strategy of that report. Basically, I think Biden administration is 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 keeping upon with what the Trump's doing before. So it's not like huge changes. And also for if we see those different military operations, for example, the freedom of navigation operation, after Biden's presidency, it's already like have taken twice already in China. So it's actually remained the frequency and also, so basically I would say there's no huge change on Biden's administration on the South China Sea province. And oh yes, I need to make a clarify that why I emphasize the position of the Pompeo. It's because the Pompeo's statement is actually a very it's the very first time that I did not put it side inside, but his statement is the very the one that really the first time talk about certain attitude, a very certain, and not only the certain attitude, but also some I'm sorry, I think I need to find a bit on that, but it's different compared with, and it's has some kind of different impact on the later, because the US government did not so clearly clarify its South China Sea policy before, especially the attitude. And last time when we see that actually is in Obama's administration, but never use the words. And in China, there are scholars, even though say like the Pompeo statement actually means that the US government is starting to make choice in the South China Sea's core question, which is the sovereignty. And the US actually is starting to make choice in it. So that's why I will emphasize Pompeo's. And so far at the moment, Blinken's statements is not systematic as the one Pompeo already showed. And so far until today, I think the Biden administration still did not have its very systematic South China Sea policy and attitude so far. So I hope I answered the question. Even a little bit mess before, but yes, we can talk about that later if necessary.
All right, thank you. And we do have one last question here on the chat. What is it like to work in a think tank in China? How did you get involved in this career?
Oh, why I did that? Yes, it first started with my I doing my research on the South China Sea when I was in the UK, and later I just checked like the institute. Actually, they are including members, so that's why I hand over that. And now I work for the World Navy Centers, which basically focus a lot on the tactic and operational level and the strategies in different in the South China Sea. It's more like military dynamics aspects. So I want to do this job in a Chinese think tank because the Chinese think tank, it's not like in the foreign ministry. It's very, the diplomacy doing it's very professional, but in the think tank, you always have opportunities to get involved with like the diplomatic events like 1.5 track diplomacy, and then you have the ability to hear different voices, and they are more like if working as the diplomats, you have to be very cautious about the words that you are using and about attitudes and your personal ideas. But in think tank, I think I have much more probability to explore the conflicts, and especially can think more on how to deal with the conflicts. And there's no limits if actually works for the think tank. So that's what I will answer for this question.
All right. So we actually have one more question from Zai.
Yeah, are you able to hear me clearly and loudly?
Yes.
Right, good evening, Ms. Song. First of all, I would like to begin by expressing my deepest gratitude to you for giving us the lecture, which I think is fruitful and insightful. Right, my name is Danny. I'm from Malaysia, which is one of the ASEAN country. According to John Mearsheimer, who is an American political scientist and international scholar, right, he's from the School of Offensive Realism. He claims that the rise of China is likely to, or will inevitably cause instability and conflicts in the region. And he further gave the example of China's recent actions in the South China Sea. John Mearsheimer claims that China would not rise peacefully as states will ceaselessly pursue power to ensure its survival in an anarchy world. And on the other hand, according to Kishore Mahbubani, a well-known Singaporean diplomat, he claims that the West has fundamental misunderstanding of China. Uh, Kishore Mahbubani claims that China has never conquered the world, but the West did. So I have two questions. Do you agree that John Mearsheimer claims that the rise of China will not be peaceful, especially in the South China Sea? How should President Trump, President Biden respond to a rising China? Yeah.
Yes, thank you for your question. That's brilliant question. So first, I will talk about like how to see like the rise in China if it's really like threatening. So one particular example, actually, just don't see China is very strong and very tough, and it's rising and it's very intimidate. To be honest, in practically so far, all the like even the law enforcement agency in China, they actually do not harm any like even the any no have any like bloody events during the whole process. So especially China need to be very concerned with the costs of all these disputes. And recently we see like China already get lots of like the audience costs already on its image, and everyone thinks China um, is is threatening and China is aggressive. And to be honest, I don't know whether it's actually used for the domestic motivations for certain resources, but obviously what Chinese do is, and especially what you mentioned about like the military deployment. And here today you see like US is also doing things there. And also, I did not really put that, but the climate states also have their own like forces, like military is one part for the countries in this area, and it's a component. But if using that to accuse the countries is threatening, actually I don't think it's very fair on that issue, and it's very fair accusation for that. And again, we go back to that I mentioned earlier that China is very cautious um, about its occupation cost, not occupation, like the reputation cost at the moment. Recently, we see we have the Coast Guard law. Actually, lots of people, because the Coast Guard law allow Chinese authorities, Coast Guard laws to use force to in some certain circumstances. So many Western countries, they are very nervous about that and ask China if they will just put a gun to a fisherman or whatever. But the problem here is like China, even though have the law, but whether China would take it in the scenario and from the practice before, we see it's actually very low probability. So on this part, what we go with the individual events, we will see like China is not threatening as the Western media actually portrayed. And besides, as for the suggestions give to President Biden, I don't see like I don't see like I really can do that, because the South China Sea only is just one small province under the whole general South China and the U.S. Relations. For me, especially a youth scholar, I definitely prefer like more communication, especially directly with the scholars, young scholars together, or the politicians, like have more communications, because that's going to help a bit to relieve the very, especially today's very intensifying atmosphere between the two countries. We've seen a lot of different sanctions, and we have embassy closing with each other. We have the revenge measures taken by each other. So it's not a very healthy status actually for the country's relations. If in the state, I just talk about like we can do it as a youth scholar, which is in the individual level, and I hope that with the personal level, it's gonna to promote the policy levels can consider like give them better suggestions on that. So for me, I cannot literally give my suggestion to him because at least I think the diplomatic decision is often made by a serious, very considerate consideration. Yes. So I hope I answer your questions.
Yes, sorry. So thank you. Unless anyone else would like to ask a question? Anyone? All right. So first of all, we would like to thank all of you coming, and we hope to see you all at our next online event or at our local chapter. And please follow us on social media to stay up to date. Thank you, Rachel, of course. It was extremely interesting.
Thank you for having me.